Welcome to Unit number 3. In this unit, we'll cover U.S. expansionism and the Progressive Era. These two time periods are happening at the same time. U.S. expansionism deals with foreign policy, or what's happening outside the country. The question we're going to answer today is, should America build an empire? The U.S. starts off real quick by acquiring 2 territories. As you can see from the cartoon on the right, Uncle Sam is much larger than he is on the left. This suggests that the U.S. is getting bigger. The stripes on his pants indicate each new territory added by the U.S. since 1800. The man making the suit, or the tailor, is President McKinley. He was in favor of expansion. Next, let's discuss the major causes of U.S. expansionism after the Civil War. The first was global economic competition. We needed colonies and places for new investments if we wanted to compete with European powers. They were busy carving up the rest of the world. Here's a map of Africa. It shows how the European countries were carving it up. The second was security needs. If we're going to protect our economic interests, we need a canal across the Isthmus of Central America and a port in Hawaii and a Caribbean island. The third was a need for more resources. As we closed the American frontier, our second industrial revolution was kicking into high gear, and we needed more resources such as coal to keep industrializing. Fourth, industrialization created a need for more markets. Once we created these new products, we needed a place to sell them to. The fifth cause was the Depression of 1893. War is good for the economy and can serve as a diversion. Number 6 is called white man's burden. The white man must civilize and Christianize the natives of the Pacific Ocean. We were considered genetically superior, therefore it's our duty to bring civilization to these natives. Of course, our religion was superior as well, so we had to bring Christianity too. The last one is called jingoism. There were Americans who had an intense form of nationalism, calling for an aggressive foreign policy, demanding that the United States take its place with the imperial nations of Europe as a world power. The most important architect of U.S. expansionism was Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan of the U.S. Navy. He wrote a book outlining how to build a world power. In The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, he wrote that nations must expand or die. The key to expansion was naval power. He was a promoter of what we call the Great White Fleet, or a powerful navy. He argued that the U.S. also needed colonies, coaling stations, and an Isthmian canal. Cuba, a canal in Panama, Hawaii, and the Philippines were keys to becoming a world power. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward purchased Alaska without the consent of the President or Congress for only $7.2 million. Congress thought it was a silly purchase and called it Seward's folly. They also call it Seward's icebox because Alaska is so cold. Seward, however, got the last laugh. He purchased a land rich in timber, minerals, and what we found later, oil. He also engineered the acquisition of the Midway Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Their name shows why they're strategically important. They are roughly halfway between the United States and Asia. Another important architect of expansion was James G. Blair. Blair was known for the idea of Pan-Americanism, or the belief in political and economic cooperation between the United States and Latin America. Latin America had close economic ties with Great Britain for most of the 19th century, and Blair believed that building Pan-Americanism would help the U.S. achieve greatness. The U.S. did a very bad thing in Hawaii. Hawaii is a very important stop between the United States and Asia. Americans invested heavily in their sugar plantations and infrastructure industries. Our military wanted also to build a naval base at their best port, known as Pearl Harbor, on the island of Oahu. We pressured the kingdom into letting us build important refueling stations for American ships there as well. When Queen Liliuokalani tried to take back the island and create a, quote, Hawaii for Hawaiians, she was overthrown by American businessmen like Sanford Dole with the help of the Marines. Dole became the first and only president of the Republic of Hawaii. He was a successful diplomat who achieved recognition of the Republic of Hawaii and helped to secure the annexation of that island chain in 1898. That means we took it over and made it a U.S. territory. Hawaii will become a state in 1959. John Hay was the author of the Open Door Policy. It opened Chinese treaty ports to equal trading opportunities for all nations while preserving Chinese territorial integrity. The U.S. wanted the ability to trade with China, which had been dominated by the Japanese and European colonial powers for a long time. The open door policy ensured the U.S. an economic foothold in China. Not everybody was excited about imperialism. Many Americans were against the United States becoming an imperial power. They were known as anti-imperialists. They gave 3 reasons to support their position. The first reason was race. We don't know what to do with different races in our own country. How are we going to deal with people in other territories? Do we give them more or less rights than those here at home? Until we figure out what to do with races here, should we go and get territories with new different types of people? The second was from personal experience. We used to be a British colony. Remember how we felt being a colony? What did we do to our parent country when we were a colony? We revolted. Do we want the same thing to happen to ourselves? The third has to do with major problems here at home. Shouldn't we take care of our problems here first before going outside our country and adding a whole new set of problems? One of the most important events in U.S. foreign policy was the Spanish-American War. I'm going to outline for you the 4 causes of this conflict. I'll start with the Cuban Revolution. The Spaniards had the largest empire in the world until the British established their empire. By the late 1800s, the Spanish Empire had dwindled to the Philippines and Guam in the Pacific, Cuba and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, and a few outposts in Africa. Cuba lies only 90 miles from Florida. The U.S. always had an economic interest in Cuba and even tried to buy it from Spain. The Spanish responded by saying they would rather see it sunk into the ocean. American businessmen invested heavily in Cuba's large sugarcane plantations. By the 1890s, Cubans had already revolted against Spain once and lost. They did, however, gain freedom for their slaves. Cuban exile José Martí led the revolt for Cuba's Second War for Independence. Americans were divided. American businessmen wanted the U.S. government to protect their investments in Cuba by backing the more stable government of Spain. However, many Americans sided with José Martí and the Cubans. The first cause of the Spanish-American War is the Cuban Revolt. The Spanish sent General Valeriano Weyler to Cuba to restore order. Weyler tried to crush the rebellion, which was hiding in the countryside, by herding entire rural populations into concentration camps. 300,000 Cubans filled the camps, with thousands of them dying from hunger and disease. This earned Weyler the nickname of the Butcher. Many Americans read about the Butcher and started to side with the Cubans. The Butcher's actions fueled the sale and circulation of America's newspapers. Newspaper tycoons like William Randolph Hearst, who owned the New York Journal, used sensational headlines and exaggerated stories to sell more papers. This type of writing is known as yellow journalism. Hearst sent an artist, Frederick Remington, down to Cuba to document the Butcher's actions. Remington got down to Cuba and found nothing out of the ordinary. He wired this information to Hearst. Hearst's famous response was, "You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war."